Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Firstly, I'd love to show my immense gratitude if you're a returning listener, and a massive welcome to new listeners that may have been tuning in for the first or second time. Last week's episode with Pia Schindler from Emergency was really well received, and I have something very similar for you this week. So since the TPD changes were announced on August 19, there are rumoured to now be up to about 500 New South Wales police having left. So with this in mind, and also personal experience with my mates that have left in the last couple of months, I thought it would be amazing to get today's guest, Melissa Arndell from Bourke Legal, on to talk about the workers' compensation process. Melissa practices in New South Wales, so what she speaks about is most relevant to this state, and we do focus on police because we want to support the large numbers that are currently leaving. If you want specific advice for your own circumstances, it is highly recommended that you seek legal advice. Bourke Legal are happy to offer you a free initial consultation, and their details are in the show notes. I know that this time, when you've made the decision to leave an occupation that you likely love because of workplace injury, whether it be physical or psychological, can leave you feeling anxious and overwhelmed. Information in relation to the process can be difficult to digest, especially with a psychological injury. And for me personally, I love learning through audio, so anyone else who is the same, we've got you. So after moving to regional New South Wales in 2012, Melissa pursued her passion for law while working as a paralegal at a boutique personal injury firm. She graduated from the Legal Profession Admission Board in 2019 and was admitted as a solicitor in May 2020. Melissa quickly found her calling in plaintiff personal injury law, representing individuals injured at work, in accidents, or public premises. She has extensive experience advocating for clients in the Personal Injury Commission and the District Court. Her focus is on helping first responders, especially those suffering from PTSD, navigate the workers' compensation system with compassion and determination. Melissa is an IRO-approved lawyer, a member of the New South Wales and Central West Law Societies, and was awarded the New South Wales Law Society's Early Career Lawyer of the Year in 2022. She's also been a finalist for multiple prestigious awards in 2023, including Rising Star of the Year in both private practice and SME law. Beyond her legal career, Melissa enjoys spending time with her family and their animals on a rural property near Orange, New South Wales. She's passionate about Pilates, podcasts, and family game nights, even if she rarely wins at Uno. Melissa is just so lovely and an absolute wealth of knowledge, so let's get into it. Welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma, the podcast that explores journeys of resilience and hope. I'm Rosie, a yoga and breathwork teacher and founder of Tactical Yoga Australia. As a former soldier's wife, mum to 3 beautiful kids, and a medically retired New South Wales police officer with PTSD, I understand the challenges of navigating mental health in the first responder and veteran community. Join us for incredible stories from individuals who've confronted the depths of mental illness and discovered their path to happiness and purpose, as well as solo episodes and expert discussions. Together, we'll uncover the tools to help you navigate your journey toward a brighter, more fulfilling life. Whether you're looking for helpful insights, practical tips, or just a friendly reminder that you're not alone, Triumph Beyond Trauma has got your back. You matter, and your journey to a happier, more meaningful life starts right here.
It's just reassurance that people want to know that that they're supported and that they're making the right decision. And I can't, of course, tell them whether they're making the right decision or not from a medical perspective, but it's just letting them know that if they do make that call that they need to leave and they can't go back, that the system, the workers' comp system, will actually support them and their family. It's not quite as good, but it's a pretty good safety net. And that's, I think, what most people want to hear. And when I'm talking to them, that's where I see the relief, where they go, okay, if I need to do this, I will be okay financially as well.
Yeah, that's a great introduction to the episode. Melissa Arndell, welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma. Thank you so much for coming on, especially at this particular time in, I would say, the New South Wales Police Force. History is changing a little bit in relation to some entitlements. So I really appreciate your time today. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be a personal injury lawyer?
Thanks, Rosie. Well, thank you for having me on. I'm always happy to have these discussions because I think it's so important that people have information.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's a particularly tricky time for police officers with the recent TPD changes. And I was listening to your episode with Pia, which was fantastic. And I think it's all about just getting this information out there. So happy to do that.
Yeah.
Um, Look, in terms of my history, I came to the law a little bit late. I'd already had 2 kids, married, and then decided to undertake my law degree. So that was in my 30s. And when I first started working in the law, I was drawn to the area of personal injury because it's got that real human element. You're actually sitting across from people, you're helping them through a really challenging time. And I just thought that it was a really rewarding area of law. And as I've gone on and have continued to practice as a personal injury lawyer, I've now got a real focus on first responders, specifically police, and assisting them. Um, Now, I know, Rosie, I mentioned that I probably wouldn't talk too much about this, but I do have a close family member who is a police officer and who is going through PTSD. So it's another way of me being able to give back to police like yourself that have served and have now, through no fault of their own, found themselves in a really tricky situation. And just being able to sit down with them and provide them with some advice about what their benefits are and what their entitlements are, I find a really rewarding area of law, and it's something that I just love coming in and making a difference.
Yeah. And you would see when you get some really good results for people, the weight that would be lifted because of that as well, right?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes, or I suppose the journey, and it can be a bit of a long journey in terms of when people are first coming in to see me and seek some advice. And I'll often be sitting down with the police officer and also with their husband or wife as well, which I think is really important because they're going through this process too, and they have questions too. And during those initial conferences, they're scared,
Yeah.
they're angry often. They're angry at the system. They're angry that they're in this situation, and they want information. They want to understand what their next chapter is going to look like and what their life is going to look like going forward. But as we go through the process and we develop that rapport and we get some good results for them, you're right, Rosie. Towards the end, they're often very different people.
Yeah.
Um, they've had some wins. They've received only what they're entitled to. You know, we're never asking for more than what they are entitled to in terms of compensation and that kind of thing. But I feel like they feel like, okay, there's someone out there that's on my side that's supporting me. And I've now, perhaps received some compensation or a TPD benefit or whatever it might be that means that I can focus on my recovery, and they're doing that. They've had some time away from the police and they are then thinking about what the next chapter is. And, sometimes the change in my clients over that period of time is so profound. They speak differently, they look different. It really does have a positive impact on their life. But and I'm sure we'll talk about it as well, Rosie. The process can be difficult, and I'm not saying that it's all, flowers and roses and all of that kind of thing. It can be difficult as you're going through it, but I think it's that, what I want to tell people today is if you're in the midst of the process or in the beginning stages, that there is that light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. It is a process. So
Mm,
I guess we should just start at the start then,
mm,
of that process. And I guess you're in New South Wales,
yes,
and there is a lot of New South Wales police that probably listen to the podcast. So
mm.
if we'd probably talk to that for anyone else listening. But just a quick question, is the system different from state to state in Australia, or is it reasonably similar?
There are differences state to
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
And being a New South Wales personal injury lawyer, that's my area of expertise. So that's what we will be focusing on today, absolutely. But, if anyone is listening from another state or another jurisdiction, I do recommend that you just seek some advice from an expert in that state. It's the best thing you can do. If you don't gel with the person or you hear the information and you think that's not for you, that's fine. But at least have that information available to you.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. We'll start from the start in New South Wales, and we will talk about New South Wales Police, I guess, because that's something that's really relevant. So from the first initial stages of submitting the P902 for New South Wales Police, or whatever that is for the other first responder agencies, right through until medical discharge. Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, sure. So I'll put my lawyer hat on for a moment, Rosie, and give the disclaimer. This is general advice. If you do need specific advice for your circumstances, speak to a lawyer. But look, what do we want to do is give a bit of an overview of what it looks like. And um, often the first point for police is putting in that P902. A P902 is an incident notification. And look, we're going to talk a lot about psychological injuries today, mainly being PTSD. But for all injuries, if you've suffered a physical injury as a police officer, put in that P902. And one thing that we might come to is that I'll often have police officers say to me down the track, "Oh, I wish I'd have put more in for these niggles, for the little physical injuries that often they'll say, oh, I was just trying to get on with things and I didn't actually put the P902 in," because unfortunately, smaller niggles can cause bigger injuries down the track. And so it's important that you do notify the police of any physical injury as well as a psychological injury. So, if you've seen something that has been particularly traumatic, pop that in and put a P902 in so that the police are aware that, that's something that you've had to deal with. So often when I'm seeing police officers, they've put in that P902, it says something along the lines of, I've had this accumulation of traumatic experiences over 10, 20, 30 years of my policing career, and I just can't do it anymore. And we see that all the time. It's very common. And in fact, there isn't much that police need to prove in terms of having a psychological injury. Of course, there needs to be a diagnosis, but it's quite logical to think that these police that are seeing all of these things, I mean, I've heard some of the stories on your podcast, Rosie, the things that you have had to see throughout your career. It would put someone like me, a normal kind of outside that first responder area, I wouldn't be able to handle it, I'm sure. And it's that accumulation of all of those things, of the death messages, of the motor vehicle accidents, et cetera, that can cause that psychological injury. So once you've popped that in, I do recommend that you also see your GP and get a certificate of capacity. So that's a document that simply says that because of whatever the diagnosis is, and sometimes GPs will say, well, look, I think there might be some PTSD there, but we'll refer on to a psychologist and a psychiatrist to look into that a bit more. But because of that PTSD, I think you need some time off work. And so the certificate of capacity might say, well, for the next month, you're not fit for your pre-injury duties. So if you've got that P902 in, you've got the certificate of capacity, and then you make sure that you do seek appropriate referrals to other practitioners, normally a psychologist and a psychiatrist, if that's what your GP recommends. That's the first step in the process. And, for some people, they might be able to pop that all in, get a little bit of treatment and head back. But what we're finding is that the more that you are exposed to, the more difficult it is to be able to go back, because unfortunately, again, as you know, Rosie, there's all of these triggers when you are working as a police officer, and you can't really separate from that. And so if it is getting to the point where you're struggling psychologically, it is often the case that your practitioners might start to say, look, I don't know if a return is on the cards for you. Was that kind of your experience, or?
Yeah, I sort of struggled with that a little bit, but the reason that I sought help was because I wasn't sure of my own capabilities to go back on the truck.
Mm.
And I just had never wanted to be someone that wasn't able to be relied upon as a partner.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that is something I really struggled with. And I resounded to the fact that I still wasn't sure about how I would react if there was a really bad incident. And I felt like there was only one more in me and I would have been really tipped over the edge. And unfortunately, I was already there, but it was good that I recognized it. But I definitely did struggle with that decision. And then just decided, yeah, I'm not going back. And when I talk to friends now, I sort of say, if you can think of it as, it's probably a bit extreme, but drinking poison, how much, if that's what's making you ill,
Yes.
why would you keep drinking it?
Mm.
Yeah. And I think it sort of makes sense to a lot of people because can be a toxic environment. It's really harmful. And like you said, police see a lot that a lot of other people don't see. So it's not a great surprise to medical professionals when police come in after, 10 or 15 or 20 years and say, oh, something's not right. And unfortunately for police, we struggle to believe that.
Yes.
We really do.
Yes.
And have to almost be convinced that we're not okay, but that is okay.
Mm.
Because that's something I remember saying to my psychologist. I said, there's something wrong with my brain. And she's like, no, your brain's doing exactly what it needs to do,
Yeah.
because of what you've seen and done. And I'm like,
Exactly.
oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So yes, it is something that I did struggle with a lot.
Well, often it's also the family members that notice it first
Mm,
rather than the police officer themselves. They notice the changes and sometimes it's that push to say, "Okay, something's going on here. You're not the same as what you used to be." And you're right. I think the other thing is that it is hard. It's incredibly hard to admit that maybe this career that you've poured your heart and soul into and that you saw as your career for life is perhaps not something that you can continue with. And often it's for the police officers, it's hearing from their treating practitioners and having that decision taken out of their hands to a degree where they're not saying, "I can't do this." Someone else, the psychiatrist, is saying, "You shouldn't be doing this. This is not going to end well for you, and you need to think about stepping back."
yeah.
Um, and then the other thing you mentioned, Rosie, is about you're right, like having just being in the role that you are in for a certain period of years. What I'm finding is that EML, who is the workers' compensation insurer, they are sophisticated enough to know that a police officer who's been serving for X number of years has seen these things, and therefore it is pretty logical that there is a PTSD diagnosis. So I suppose that's one point of reassurance that often police will think, "Oh, what happens if they don't believe me? What if they don't think I have PTSD?"
Yes. Yes.
You look like you resonated with that,
I
Rosie.
literally had this conversation 40 minutes
Mm,
ago with one of my
mm,
friends. That feeling,
yes,
in the very, very initial stages, that every time you see a medical professional, that you have to prove that injury
yes,
every single time.
yes,
And when you're going in those very initial stages,
mm,
weekly or fortnightly, you've got your GP and then you've got your psych, and then,
yes,
the psychiatrist will come on board. And every time you have that feeling like, okay, now I need to prove to them
mm.
it's been 3 months, but I'm still no good. That's really hard to deal with.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
it is.
yeah,
But I guess in my experience, I'm not seeing it's not like there are many claims that are declined. It's,
yeah,
as I said, it's what we were saying before. It is a logical um, process to say, okay, this is what this person has been through, and it therefore makes sense that they're suffering from this illness. And so, even though you can think that you do need to keep showing that you're not okay and that this isn't made up and it's something that you're struggling with, the vast majority of the time these claims are accepted. So if the medical advice is that you need some time off, put that claim in and then let EML as the workers comp insurer support you in terms of financial benefits, and perhaps that's what we can talk about next, Rosie.
yeah. So we've talked about getting your certificate of capacity from the GP and
Mhm,
seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist or both, whatever you're referred
mhm.
to. And then what is that time frame for the insurer to accept that claim?
Yeah. So we call it accepting liability for the claim, which means that EML as the workers' compensation insurer is acknowledging that your injury has been caused by your employment. And sometimes it can be quite quick. You can get an acceptance of liability within a few weeks. Sometimes they might ask for a little bit of more information, and often that will involve attending an appointment with an independent psychiatrist who is looking at things from the perspective of, okay, this is how the claim has been made. I want to examine this person. I want to see what their treating practitioners have said, and again confirm that it is a PTSD diagnosis arising from work. But again, Rosie, most of the time that is all okay. It's a daunting process, especially trying to tell your story to someone that you've never met before, as an independent psychiatrist, and also knowing that that person is working for the insurer to a degree. I mean, they are meant to be independent, but of course, we do know who's paying their report fee bills. But most of the time, that is going through okay.
Yeah. And for police, especially, we're paranoid of everyone and everything. So that does add actually an
Mm,
extra layer to it, knowing that
it
they are
does.
paid by the insurers. And
Yeah.
most of them that I've come across have been fantastic and
Mm,
even mentioned, it wouldn't matter if you're paying me or the insurer's paying me, I am here to do this one particular job, and I'll do
Yes.
the same no matter who pays me. So that's actually been quite comforting for me, because I have that little bit of paranoia in, in
Yeah, and
relation
it's
to the whole
completely
thing.
normal. I mean,
Yeah.
it is. It's a very normal reaction to have.
Mm. And then, so from the acceptance of the claim from EML, and I know that this process actually is taking quite a long time, because there's a bit of a backlog in relation to medical discharge.
Mm.
So in that time period, what happens for New South Wales Police in relation to payment? So I know they get a 9-month period where they're still paid. Is it 100% of their wage,
Yeah.
but
Well,
for overtime and
that's correct. Yes.
that's yeah?
So
Could you explain that a little bit if you can?
yeah. So once the claim's accepted, a police officer is entitled to 9 months at their award rate. So if they were a maxed out senior connie, that's what they're going to be receiving. If they're a sergeant, it would be that figure. But you're right, Rosie, it doesn't include overtime and user pays. So sometimes that can be a little bit less for someone. But I mean, for at 9 months, it's that award rate figure. And just to touch on medical discharge quickly, a few years ago, it would be around that time, around the 9-month mark, where a medical discharge would start to occur. But now, because of the huge backlog in terms of police officers that are going off, especially with psychological injury, those medical discharge processes have been delayed considerably. And so it's not uncommon for a police officer to be off for 18 months to 2 years before they actually get a medical discharge date. Um, it doesn't affect anything in terms of their entitlements, but it can be really hard to have that hanging over your head, because that medical discharge date it's a real line in the sand.
Yeah.
It's bittersweet, because often a police officer will know that it's coming, and acknowledge that it needs to come, but it means a lot in terms of then having that date where you are no longer a serving police officer. Have you been medically discharged as yet, Rosie?
Yeah, I have. I was medically discharged in 2019.
Mm,
And like back then it was pretty quick. So that was good.
mm,
And there's two really important parts of my journey. The first one was being diagnosed with PTSD
mm,
and the empowerment that came from that.
mm,
And the second one that I like to tell my friends is that your date of discharge is one of the greatest days as well, because you don't have to deal with the police as well any
mm.
um
Yes.
which is really relieving,
Mm,
and it does, like, the little weights on your shoulders become less and less.
yes.
And I did struggle with it a little bit. I'd
Mm,
already reconciled that I was no longer part of that, family, um, which is still a little bit untrue, because I still have a lot of friends
yeah.
within that. But you were part of something and now you're not anymore. And I remember saying to my husband, "What was that all for?" Because it's such a bizarre day.
Mm,
You expect something.
yes. And
um,
it just
it's
passes,
just and
really,
it's
doesn't
just a
it?
day. It's just a
Yeah.
day. And I think, some of my friends have received text messages and I didn't get anything, which was
Mm,
fine, because I actually didn't want to hear from them anyway. It's
mm,
so bizarre the way your mind works.
yeah.
And we just went out for dinner, and my husband replied, "That was just a chapter of your life. It was just part of your life. And then
Yeah.
now you're going to do something else
Mm,
and move on."
yeah.
Yeah, I still struggle with that a little bit, but it's true. It's a bizarre day, but it really is a great line in the sand. And I
Mm,
feel like, your recovery journey just maybe steps it up a little bit after that as well. Because that's one,
yeah.
one thing that you can now leave behind and focus on yourself a little bit more again.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
right. Yeah, I think that next chapter analogy is a good one, because it is about saying, okay, that was that, and that was a great chapter and a hard chapter, and all of those things all rolled up into one.
Yeah.
But let's focus on what's next.
Yeah.
So as I said, that will generally be a little bit later for police that are going off now. But going back to the weekly benefits,
Yes.
we've spoken about the 9 months at the award rate.
Yeah.
After that, what happens is that police will transition onto a 7-year period where they are receiving 75% of their award rate. So there's that 25% loss. Those 75% payments are made up of a payment from EML based on the number of dependents that they have. So if you've got dependent children or a dependent spouse, you'll generally receive a little bit more from EML. But it doesn't matter how much you receive from EML, because TAL, as the income protection insurer, will top you up to 75% of your award rate for that 7-year period. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of that safety net. A lot of police officers don't really know what they're entitled to going forward. Some have a bit of an idea, but it's just that reassurance that there is 7 years, which is a decent period of time to be able to get that assistance. Like I said, it's not as good as if you were remaining in the cops, but you are getting that 75% to be able to assist with things like the mortgage and the household expenses, the school fees, etc. Normally around that time, people would also be putting in their TPD claim. And of course, this is something that's very up in the air at the moment.
Yes.
Um, as you've said when you were speaking with Pia, from 1 October, that TPD benefit is no longer available to police. And I did a post about that. I just can't fathom either
Mm.
how this has happened in terms of the people that are protecting us, these police officers,
Mhm.
not being able to access this payment, which was, again, a security for doing the kind of work that you do, for putting your life on the line, and that the fact that you cannot now receive this TPD, so total and permanent disablement benefit payment, which was just went towards making up that extra 25% that is lost. And it meant that, people could put some money on the mortgage or just have that as a bit of a security blanket there. That's going to be something that's really difficult for police going forward.
Yeah. So in relation to what's current, so before October 1, for someone that has gone off, say this year, say before
Yes.
October 1st, one of the questions I've had is how do they get that payment in particular? And
Mm,
it's actually quite simple, really.
it
I
is.
feel it's probably one of the most simple parts of the whole
Yeah.
journey, I think. But can you explain that maybe a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, some lawyers will actually make the TPD claim for their clients. It's not something that I do where I am. Where I work for a firm called Bourke Legal, and we generally recommend that our clients do it themselves. And the reason is exactly what you said, Rosie. It is quite simple. It's about calling up Aware, who is the superannuation fund, and saying, "I'd like to make a TPD claim. I'd like to claim for this benefit." You do need to have been off work for 6 months to be able to make the claim. So there is that waiting period. But after that, Aware sends you the claim forms. There's one for you to fill out, which is all just information that you would know. It's your details, your employment history, your circumstances. And then there's one form to be filled in by your GP, who is signing off on the fact that they believe that you are not able to return to work that you're reasonably qualified to do by way of education, skills, training, or experience. And so for most police officers, that is as a police officer.
Yeah.
So the GP signs off on their form, and then a psychiatrist needs to sign off on the other. And that's another reason why it's important to have a psychiatrist involved, because often it's the psychologists that do a lot of the in-depth work and you've got quite a good relationship with. But unfortunately for the TPD process, as they're not a doctor, they can't fill out that TPD form for you. So one from the GP, one from the psychiatrist, send it all back to Aware with your form, and they will then look at the TPD benefit. And again, the reassurance there is that most of these TPD benefits have been getting approved to date. The only time where you might encounter a bit of difficulty is if you have some secondary employment or some study that you're looking at doing. That can make the waters a little bit murky. But for most police, they've gone off and they are not looking at working or studying at that point in time. They're really just trying to focus on their recovery. So those TPD benefits are being paid generally within about 6 months from lodging the claim.
Yeah, I remember it being quite quick.
Mm.
In in relation to everything else, that was probably
Yes.
one of the easiest and two quickest processes that I went through for sure. And yeah, yeah, the episode that I did with Pia, like I'm fuming that they've taken this away for police officers because I know that there's a bit of a stigma attached to it where, they call it the mortgage buster or anything like that.
Mm.
But it's not that. I think it's the psychologically, it's very helpful to know that your family is still going to be okay while you are off work, not
Yes.
earning money. And then that enables you to be able to focus on your recovery. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one
that's
of
the
the
most
main
important.
concerns, it's a
Mm,
financial perspective. People will say to me, I don't know if I can leave because I don't know if we can afford it financially."
yeah,
And I mean, again, that's a question for them and their families and their treating practitioners. But at least if that TPD benefit is available, it goes some way to just making sure that they've got that amount of money sitting there that they can draw on if they need to. But with these changes coming up on 1 October, I mean, the fact that that's not only not available through police blue ribbon, but is also from what we understand, not available from any other provider as well. I mean, it just boggles the mind that they can take that away when there's when there's no alternative. It's not like you can go and insure yourself in another superannuation fund.
Yeah, that's right. I think, yeah, that's really important to point out because that's why it was so good. And that's how it was sold because, no one else is going to insure you because of the work that you do. And then now we're not either because of the
Yeah,
work that you do. Like,
because of the work that you
it's
do.
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you know much about the extra 3 years? Have you been able to?
Look,
It's so no one does, I think.
no one really knows
Yeah.
exactly because there's wording in the new documentation that is quite broad and quite vague. So the idea is that rather than having those income protection payments at 75% going for a period of 7 years, there's a possibility that they can extend it up to 10 years. And that's how it's been marketed through the police association, saying, look, this is a really great deal. You're getting that extra 3 years. But the reality is we still don't really know what the definition is that you need to meet. There's some talk about it being similar to a TPD definition. And so what that means is that at the end of the 7-year period, you potentially need to show that you still cannot return to work as a police officer, but potentially any other work. And that's quite a hard definition to meet 7 years post-injury. And a lot of people want to be able to be working in some capacity at that period in time. Um, and so the other issue with it, as you know, Rosie, is who is making the decisions in relation to the extension from 7 years to 10 years, and that all seems to be being suggested that it will be done internally. And how that can be independent is something that we will really need to wait and see. So, yeah, look, we're speaking at a time where there is still a little bit up in the air, but I guess if we work on the basis of income protection payments going for at least that 7-year period, and then as time goes on, we'll get a bit more of an idea as to what that will look like going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Now, do police have to make application for those income protection payments? Like, say someone's just left, they're in their very first weeks. Do they have to make an actual application, or does that all sort of just happen behind the scenes? How does that work for people?
There is an application, but it's quite simple in terms of the process. So probably closer to the 6-month mark once someone has been off for about 6 months, and particularly if their practitioners are telling EML as the workers' comp insurer and TAL as the income protection insurer who starts to become involved about that time that a return to work is unlikely, then the police officer will receive some paperwork to fill in. So that might actually come from injury management, who will send it through, and it will be similar to the TPD form in that it'll be some paperwork about what are your circumstances, who are your dependents, all of that kind of information. And the other thing that I like to mention here, Rosie, is sometimes people will say to me, "Well, 75%, that's still not enough. Like we're mortgaged up to the eyeballs. We've got the kids in school." So one thing that police officers can consider doing is using their leave as a bit of a top up, so that they can actually ensure that they're receiving closer to that 100% for a period of time. And again, that's personal circumstances and personal preference as to whether or not they wish to do that. But some people would rather have that additional 25% being paid out of their leave entitlements, especially if they perhaps have some long service leave banked up, rather than having it paid in a lump sum upon medical discharge. It just means that from a cash flow perspective and budgeting perspective, it's a little bit easier to deal with that drop down to the 75%.
And I can imagine if you do have a substantial amount of leave, the tax
Mm.
implications in getting that in a lump sum could be, yeah, pretty big as well.
Yeah, potentially. That's right.
Yeah.
Look, there is one thing that I just haven't mentioned back on the
Yeah.
weeklies, and that's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that often police aren't aware of. And that is that after the 7 years of income protection payments finishes, you are actually entitled to ongoing payments to the age of 68.
Yes.
So those payments are paid by EML as the workers' compensation insurer. So after the 7 years, TAL as the income protection insurer has fulfilled its obligation and it doesn't need to make any more payments. But while ever you are still diagnosed with PTSD, and that's different for people. I mean, you can be even working, you can be functioning, but you still have a PTSD diagnosis. So while ever you're still having those PTSD symptoms perhaps, and through to the age of 68, you'll receive an ongoing payment from EML. And that might be around about $40,000 a year. Again, it depends on the number of dependents you have. So if you've got kids that are still studying, then you'll generally receive a little bit more as opposed to if you're a single person. But those payments of about 35 to 40 grand a year will continue on to the age of 68. As long as you're not earning more than what you were earning when you were working as a police officer. It's showing that it's not as good, and and it's a small payment, of course, but it might mean that for a police officer, they can earn 70, 80 grand a year and still be walking away with 120 grand a year, which it might be similar to the amount that they were receiving when they were employed as a police officer.
Yeah. And that means too, with the skills that police have, which is something that they doubt
Definitely.
when we leave, you can work part-time. You
Yes.
don't have to bounce back into a full-time job immediately. You can progress. But I just wanted to ask, you did touch on that pre-injury income. Now, does that sit back in, say, when I left in
Mm.
2018 or 2019 when I was discharged, or does that move up with each of the increases? So,
Mm.
if in 10 years' time, is it what, say, a senior constable level 5 gets, if that's what you left at that year level? Does
Yeah.
that change?
So what happens is the increments they're not taken into account. So if you're a senior constable level 4, you would stay as a senior constable level 4.
Yeah.
But it does take into account increases. And we can often argue, if we're looking at those kind of figures down the track for a police officer, we could argue, okay, well, they were a senior constable, but they'd been acting in the role as sergeant. And, they were doing quite a bit of overtime. So something that might be 120 grand, we might be able to argue in 7, 10 years' time would be closer to 160 grand, taking into account overtime, user pays, promotion, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Another great reason to have a good solicitor.
Well, it just means that if, for example, you are earning some money, if you're working in another role, we want that level to be as high as possible for you so that EML then aren't taking their money out of those earnings.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. So to continue to get those payments, though, are there any requirements of the injured person?
The only requirement really is in terms of ensuring that you're continuing to have certificates of capacity completed. And so often it will be your GP or your psychiatrist that's filling those out. They can extend to 3 monthly rather than 1 monthly after a period of time. So apart from that, and apart from unfortunately sometimes needing to see an independent doctor from EML, just to confirm that things are still as they have been in the past, that there's no other requirement, and you will be able to receive those payments through to the age of 68.
Yeah. While we're here on this subject, can we talk a little bit about work injury damages?
Mm,
Because I think it's sort of something that we have to think about
mm,
moving forward. So, and it sort of ties in with that payment part of the workers' compensation.
yeah. So a work injury damages claim, Rosie, it's a claim for your loss of wages for the past and for the future through to retirement age. It also encompasses superannuation. So it's not an amount of money that isn't based on specific figures. It is an amount of compensation that's payable based on your actual loss because of your injury. To bring a work injury damages claim, you need to be at least 15% whole person impairment. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well and what that means. But if we just think there's a threshold that you need to meet, and that means that your injury needs to be severe enough to be at that level. So you need to get over that threshold to be eligible to bring a work injury damages claim. And the other thing is you need to be able to prove that the police force was negligent and it was that negligence that's caused your injury. So for some people, unfortunately, they may have been telling the police that they were okay. They may have never stuck their hand up, and that does happen. I mean, you don't want to be the one that's saying I'm struggling,
Yeah.
and so in those circumstances, it can be a little bit harder to bring the claim because how do we then prove that there was something the police could have done to have prevented your injury? But, there's a whole lot of things that the police should be doing and that they're often not. There's well checks that they should be doing in certain departments. There's making sure that if you're attending a whole host of events that are particularly traumatic, that there's some incident register that records them and that they're saying to you and asking you, are you actually okay? You haven't put your hand up, but is there something going on? So there needs to be a way to prove that the police force was negligent. So if you meet those two criteria, if you're over 15% and there's some negligence on the part of the police force, then you can bring that work injury damages claim. And the claims can be a drawn out process, unfortunately, Rosie. I've brought a few of them for police, but to be honest, it's not something that we recommend a lot of the time where I work, and I'll tell you why. And other lawyers will have different points of view. But from our perspective, if you have a psychological injury and we're then asking you to attend all of these medical appointments, attend a mediation, go to a potential court hearing in the District Court of New South Wales, give evidence, see all of this, a process that could take a couple of years, that is going to have an impact on your psychological health. And you need to be sure that that's something that you can and want to do. Um, if you do go through the process, then you lose your ongoing entitlements to weekly benefits and medical expenses. So as soon as you settle a work injury damages claim, you don't have any future entitlement to those. And as I was explaining before, those entitlements can be worth quite a bit of money. And depending on your age as well, if you're potentially giving up 20, 30 years of ongoing payments and medical expenses, so you now need to pay for the cost of your psychiatrist appointments, you need to cover inpatient treatment, or if you've had a physical injury, you need to cover the costs of a back surgery, for example, that can be quite a burden. So for a lot of our clients, we don't recommend going down that process because of all of those things. As well, the legal fees associated with it are very expensive because we're looking at a claim that runs over a couple of years. But for some people, Rosie, they want to get out of the scheme.
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with EML as the insurer anymore. They would prefer to give away some of their entitlements to be able to walk away with a lump sum payment, and then move on with their lives. And so for some people, it is right for them. But what we're finding is that the amounts that are being paid and being offered to police officers, when you compare them to their ongoing entitlements, they're not anywhere near worth making the claim and bringing it in that way.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. In my own personal circumstance, definitely that's the case. And I couldn't imagine after having to go through, all the things I've already been through to then bring a claim like that and have to do everything you said, like go to court and fight for that.
Yeah.
And what would feel like proving your injury all over again.
Mm.
I couldn't do it, actually. I was like, I don't think I have the capacity to go through all of that. I don't think it would be very conducive to recovery either for myself. So there's a lot to think about there.
There is.
And I think for people, so the thing that's happening now, and it's so great that we're having conversations with each other as police, but there's an issue with it too.
Mm.
And that is that some people are further ahead, and they're trying to be as helpful as possible and saying, don't forget about this, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do that. And for someone that's been off for 3 weeks, that is just
So overwhelming.
mind-boggling, so overwhelming.
Yes.
And, I say to friends that you don't need to worry about that yet. That will happen later on.
Mm.
What you need to worry about is, going to your GP and getting your certificates and seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist, and just keep doing that to get better. And I love people, especially police, because we all sort of try and stick together, especially when we're on the other side, and help each other. And it's so important that you've come on, because I really want you to explain all these things to people that and work out, where they sit in that journey as well. One question I did get, and it's from someone that sort of left recently, and they're finding it very overwhelming to do all this by themselves. So pushing themselves to go and see their GP every week or every 3 weeks. And then in between that, every fortnight, they're seeing a psychologist. And at what point, they're pushing themselves alone, and then they're still fielding calls from work. Bosses calling, when are you coming back? It's likely they probably won't be going back. But they're not saying that, they're saying, well, as long as I keep getting these certificates and my medical professionals are saying I can't come back, then I'm not coming back.
Yes.
It's really difficult while dealing with that psychological injury as well, all those other components. And their question is like, how can they get the help from a solicitor in relation to all that? And when does a solicitor come on board?
Well, We have the whole gamut of clients that we help. We have clients that come to us after a couple of weeks or even before lodging the claim and saying, I think I need to go off. Can you give me some advice around what that will look like? And then we have clients that have been out of the system or been out of the police force, I should say, for a couple of years and are now hearing, oh, apparently there's a few things I'm entitled to. Can you give me some help around that?
Yes.
So it really doesn't matter, and it's what you're comfortable with. I agree, though. I see that. I mean, everything that we've spoken about so far, Rosie, it's complex. There's a
So
lot of
complex.
elements. And so when you're asking someone that is suffering from PTSD to try and understand this, when concentration and focus is generally an issue, you're probably having some issues with your memory. It's very hard to be able to navigate all of this by yourself. And you're right, when you put all the appointments and everything like that in there, it becomes a full-time job trying to
Yes.
navigate it all. So, look, I think if you want some assistance, just ask. There are many law firms that focus on first responders. We, for example, have a claim checker on our website where you can put in your details and we'll then contact you and get in touch and help you navigate the process. But again, I think it's just about getting the information.
Yeah.
And if there's someone that can help you that deals with this kind of thing day in, day out, I feel like that's a really a good path to go down. There's no reason not to really. If you can get that assistance, I think it helps.
What about, these are some things that I didn't know about, and that's the Section 66 and Section 67 claims in relation to those psychological injuries. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So people have generally heard of them as Section 66 and 67 claims or whole person impairment claims. And we can make claims for some compensation for both physical and psychological injuries. And it's really it's not, we're not talking about huge amounts of money, to be frank, Rosie,
Mm.
but again, it's something that a police officer is entitled to. So talking about the psychological side of things, first of all, um, we can have you assessed by an independent psychiatrist who is really just trying to determine not whether or not you've got PTSD, that's been sorted. Not whether or not it was caused by work. Again, as we've said, that's generally taken for granted. It's about how your PTSD impacts you on a daily basis, on your levels of functioning. And so it is things like your concentration and ability to focus. Do you find that you can no longer read a book, even though you used to be able to? Now you kind of get halfway down the page and you can't remember where you're up to. Do you have issues with travel? Do you find it difficult to travel outside of your local area? Has it had an impact on your relationships with your spouse, with your kids? Have you lost friends? And of course, employability is another category in there. The fact that you're unable to maintain employment because of your injury. So we send you off to see a psychiatrist who assesses you in relation to that. And then they'll provide a report which says what level of whole person impairment they believe you're at. And that level of impairment equals a certain amount of compensation. And then on top of that, you're generally able to make a claim for some Section 67 compensation, which is for your pain and suffering. And so for psychological injuries, you need to be over 15% whole person impairment anyway to get some compensation under Section 66. But then, assuming you're there, we can also make that claim for pain and suffering. And that's just to go some way to, again, making it clear that your injury has had a big impact on yourself, on your family, and you'll potentially have to live with this injury for a little while. So the amounts of money I'm talking about might be between 40 to 60 grand tax-free for a psychological injury. So again, not huge amounts, but it's something that you're entitled to and something that we can assist you with. So once we've got the report from our psychiatrist, you do need to attend a psychiatrist from EML. And then a lot of the time we're able to negotiate in terms of what the payment is through to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for explaining that. That's one of the ones that I wasn't aware of.
And that's the thing, you don't know these things
Yeah,
unless someone tells you.
that's
EML are never going to say, "Would you like us to start this process for you?
you
We'll
know
pay you some money."
did you know there's more money you could ask for?
Yeah, exactly. But they're silent on that, which of course I understand. But you can do the same thing with your physical injuries as well,
Yeah.
Rosie. And often we will be seeing police officers mainly because of their PTSD. But when we get talking to them, they say, "Oh, actually, I've got a pretty bad back. That appointment spelt that's caused me some issues."
Mm.
Or, I've been struggling with my knees from all those foot pursuits and wrestles, or there was a particular incident where I was involved in a motor vehicle accident and I got whiplash and my neck's not right. So we can make claims for those injuries as well in a similar way under Section 66 and 67. And the other important thing to note there, Rosie, is that if you get some compensation for a physical injury, even 1% for a scar or, a couple of percentage points for a bad knee, you are then entitled to medical expenses for life for that injury. And so that's another thing that police often don't realize. And we want to be able to show that if you've been injured because of your policing career, that EML are required to pay your medical expenses. They're on the hook and not you. So if you do need physio, if you do need injections or surgery down the track, it's them that's paying those bills.
Yeah, that's so important to note because you shouldn't have to be out of pocket for something
No.
like that at all, it's great. Well, just on that, you want to talk about some medical expenses that can be covered?
Yeah. So obviously, most people are aware of the psychological expenses. So it might be that you need your psychologist and psychiatrist appointments paid for. Inpatient treatment is another one, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
Obviously, we want EML to be paying for that. Um, a few other interesting ones from a psychological perspective, though, are dental expenses. So often people don't realize that the fact that they're grinding their teeth, the fact that they're breaking their teeth and needing crowns, or perhaps they need a splint so that they're not doing that overnight, those expenses can be paid for by EML as well. And that's something that people just often don't realize. And, it can be thousands of dollars in terms of a dental bill. So if your psychiatrist can confirm that teeth grinding and those kind of things that are going on have been caused by your PTSD, then that's something that can be paid. And then other things, for example, if you've got someone that recommends that you should be heading to the gym more, but perhaps you can't go to the gym because you find it difficult to be in an area where there are other people around. People have had gym equipment paid for, exercise bikes, those kind of things, even bicycles to be able to get out in nature and do that kind of thing. They're all things that can be paid for. There's also a few other more strange ones, I guess. Not that they're not necessary at all, but some people like to go down the medicinal cannabis route. That's
Yep.
something that the insurer has paid for on occasion. And even some other things, for example, assistance dogs can be paid for due to PTSD. And on physical injuries, we even had there was a case where someone asked for a Thermomix to be paid for. So that's those thermal cookers. And the idea was that she couldn't cook meals for her family because of her physical injuries involving her upper limbs. So that was paid for also.
Yeah, that's fantastic actually, and thinking outside the box a little bit as well.
Yeah.
I know, I've mentioned it in before my program. It's an
Yes.
online program for first responders and veterans. It's based around yoga and mindfulness
Mm,
and breath work.
yes.
That's been covered by EML for someone as well. So,
Yeah.
which
Yeah, I
is
know of a
great.
treating psychologist that's recommended your program
I
actually,
do.
Rosie. Yeah. And and that's right. And I think you've got a link on your website now that there's a
I do,
form that can
yeah.
be filled in.
I've got a
Yeah.
PDF for people so they can send it to
Yeah.
a psychologist and get that recommended because, I'm getting really good reviews and
Mm.
I hate like I'm not very salesy at all, but I do think it's a really great program. And the reason for it is that people can do it by themselves in their own home. And for police, especially with PTSD, especially in the early stages when there is that paranoia and you don't want to go and see people. And a lot of people hate everyone at those initial
Yeah.
months and years.
Yeah.
It's really great that you can do something for yourself and be in control of that journey because all of this stuff that we're talking about right now is very much out of your control.
Mm.
And as police, we don't like that at all. You're reliant on your GP and you're reliant on your psych and then you're reliant on your solicitors and the insurers and you just feel like you're a bit of a pinball, being popped over here and popped over there. So that's something that when I created that program is something that I really felt police needed to be empowered more in their recovery journey. So there's lots of different avenues that people can take in relation to having certain medical expenses paid for sure. And I think
Yeah.
it's so good.
Yeah. Look, I agree. I think That's what I see as well. It's difficult enough to be leaving the house, let alone, going to potentially a yoga class with all these other people and feeling like you. I mean, I feel like that sometimes. Just
I know. I don't
you know,
feel
are they judging me? Am I doing this right? So just having that ability to do that from your own home, and if you can have the insurer pay for it, a bonus.
Yeah.
If there are issues with the insurer paying for medical expenses, as a lawyer, we can challenge those decisions as well, and we have some good success in doing that. So, if there's something that you need and it's outside your ability to pay for it, definitely look into having the insurer pay.
Yeah, that's great. What about expenses in relation to having a solicitor or, act on your behalf? What does
Yeah.
it look like and how is that paid?
Yeah. So EML are required to pay our legal fees in relation to, for example, the Section 66 and 67 claims. They're also required to pay for the medical reports associated with that. So when I was talking before about sending someone to an independent psychiatrist, as long as there is a level of impairment out of that report, then EML will pay that report fee as well. The work that we do, we try to take quite a holistic approach in that we are advising in relation to quite a lot of things. So we don't just, for example, do the Section 66 and 67 claim and that's it. We sit down with our clients and we have a really good chat initially. We've got a spreadsheet where we plug in their specific details and say, this is what things are going to look like for you. We give advice about the TPD side of things, even if we're not lodging the claim for them. And, we talk about medical discharge and are generally just available to answer any questions. So for our clients, we do have a fee that is payable for our services, but that comes out of any settlement. So it's almost like a no-win, no-fee type arrangement where unless the police officer receives some compensation of a certain level, then they don't need to pay our fees.
And is that with the 66 and 67
It
payment?
encompasses everything. So
Everything.
there's
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't include the TPD or anything, but if we do get some compensation, like you say, for Section 66 and 67, then our fee becomes payable, but it's one fee only, and then, we can run the other claims and you don't need to pay it again.
Yeah. Fantastic.
I suppose the one thing that I want to say, and it's not legal advice, it's just from my experience, is that often we'll see police and they're itching to return to work in some capacity. They feel like they're not being valuable members of society if they're not working. Obviously, to do that role, your work ethic is pretty high, and to be out of the workforce, it's really difficult. It's potentially changing the family dynamic at home and all of those kind of things. But what we see is that if you can take probably a good couple of years, like 2 years to be out of the force and just focus on your recovery, we find that those people that do that have a much better next chapter than those that try and rush back.
Yeah.
Um, and one of our directors, Brendan Bourke, he always uses the sport analogy. It's like, if you've injured your knee playing rugby and you think, oh, I'll be right, I'll just go back. And, you go back too early, then you really stuff it.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of thing. It's just acknowledging that everything that we've spoken about today, there is that safety net there for you financially. So use that as the opportunity to really focus on getting the treatment that you need so that your next chapter, like you say, Rosie, when you've got that medical discharge date and you think, okay, what's next for me? That can be a really positive experience. And, you're always going to be dealing with the PTSD symptoms, unfortunately. Like this is something that will be with you. But if you do take the time initially to really put in the work and just focus on doing what you need to do and don't worry quite yet about rushing back to work, we seem to notice that those clients have a much better next chapter.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice because I know these processes that we have to go through can be a couple of years
Mm,
and it really does, I think, delay the
yeah.
journey of becoming, that post-traumatic growth or, moving
Mm,
through your PTSD because there's so much other stuff that you're worried about
yeah.
that you don't have the time, energy or capacity to deal with your PTSD. So it definitely is a process and that it does take quite a while.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think people initially I might say that to them and they think, "Oh, I don't need 2 years."
yeah,
It's
that's a long
ridiculous.
time.
It's a really long time. And then you speak to them around that mark and we've wrapped up everything up, all the claims are paid, and they're ready to start looking into new things and they go, "Okay, it actually did take that long."
Yeah.
But I think again, it's about managing expectations, because if you do realize that it is unfortunately a bit of a process, then you've just got that understanding and you're not trying to rush back before you're ready.
That's right. That's right. And then with that line in the sand of, your medical discharge and your
Mm,
claims being finalized and you're not having to deal with so many different people, that's when your time frees up a little bit more and
mm.
you can focus on doing things that are good for you and good for your health and moving forward. And then after a little bit longer, you can start considering doing some form of work if that's what
Yeah,
you want to do. So
yeah.
it's really important, I think, just to be kind to yourself if you're
Mm.
going through that journey and to understand that it is a process and unfortunately you have to go through it, but it will be better on the other side.
Yeah, I agree. And look, there's so many organisations as well now, Rosie, as I'm sure you know, that provide assistance with that. What it might look like if you do go back. I mean, Emergency provide a lot of assistance in terms of programs and things that you can do. There's Beyond the Badge that looks specifically at career transition. There's organisations that look at specific things. So cybersecurity for police is a big burgeoning area where they're saying, look, we understand that police have these skills, and if they're interested in this, we can help you transition. So there's things that are available, but I think you just got to focus on your recovery first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
But look, I did just want to say as well that I appreciate what you're doing so much, because it's big what you're doing. But I just think it is really valuable, because there aren't enough conversations. I mean, I've got a lot out of it, like I said, as a lawyer. So yeah, I do thank you for doing this. I think it's really important work.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I think it's just something that I never had,
No.
I'm one of those people that just called. I spoke to Brendan Burke a couple of years ago and I'm like,
Mm,
oh, is there things that am I doing this wrong? Like, have I done this wrong this whole time? Because one of my friends said, oh, did you get your TPD? This is back in
mm,
2022. I said, what are you talking about? What's that?
yeah,
Are you
yeah,
kidding? You've been out for years. And I'm like, and then my stomach just dropped and I'm like, oh my God, I could have helped my family years
yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah.
It scared the shit out of me, really.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I had a similar conversation, Rosie, with
oh my
someone else who'd been out for years and
God.
years, and, like, not a client, but just an acquaintance, and similar thing, and she's like, "I've never applied for this. I had no idea."
Yeah.
And that fear of, have I done myself out of something? Have I done myself a disservice? And it's just because of lack of information. So the more we can have these conversations and at least people know generally what their entitlements are, I think it's so important.
Actually, can I ask you a question? So just in relation to the claims, what if you've been out for a few years and you're only like listening to this now or you've spoken to someone and you realize I actually haven't made a claim? Can you go and do it years later?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, there are sometimes it's going to be a little bit more difficult if
Yeah.
there has been a period of time, just depending on what's happened. But like physical injuries is a great one. Often people won't have notified of their bad back, bad knees, etc. And it's not until we're speaking and they'll say, "Oh, well, actually, I am really struggling in those areas." We can still bring claims even if they haven't been notified, even if it's years later, and we still have success. With the psychological injury, if you haven't brought a Section 66 and 67 claim but have been out for a while, it's really just looking at, how do you think you might fit into the relevant criteria? And it might be a little bit more difficult if you have returned to work, because that means you'd be assessed lower on that particular employability category. But, it's something that's worth a conversation, because again, if that's some money that you can have in your pocket through going through the process, it's worth having the conversation and seeing if you're still entitled.
Yeah. And people can call a solicitor like yourselves at Bourke Legal for no charge to have a
Yeah,
consultation like
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. So we'll always do an initial consultation free of charge and give you some advice about what you might be entitled to, and what it would look like if you'd like to retain us. And then you can make a decision as to whether or not that's something you need assistance with.
Yeah, fantastic. And so that's what everyone should do if they haven't already done it, is to give either Bourke Legal or your solicitor a choice of call and have a
Yeah.
chat and just find out what your options. You have options and you need to know what they
Yes.
are. That's so
Yes. Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Information is just power. I mean, when you've got that knowledge, when you know what you can potentially do, it just makes you feel like, okay, I know what my options are and I know where I can go to move forward.
Yeah. Makes everything a lot clearer. That's for sure,
Hmm.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's not always about the money, but it's about, your whole life,
Yeah.
and how you can move forward really well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I've appreciated this so much. And I'm so grateful because I don't want people, especially those ones leaving now, to be in the same
Yeah.
group that I was in. And I
Yeah.
just had no idea. No one talked about anything. It's all very hush hush. And I really fumbled my way through the whole
Mm,
process. So thank you so much for explaining it in such a beautiful way.
pleasure. It was really nice to be on. Thanks so much.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any new ones. We release fresh content every Tuesday. And while you're there, take a moment to leave us a review. I would genuinely appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Tactical Yoga Australia and share this episode with your friends, family, and workmates to spread inspiration. Your support means the world. My name is Rosie Skeen. Join me again next week for another empowering and positive episode of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Until then, be kind to your mind and trust in the magic of your consistent and positive efforts. Triumph beyond your trauma is closer than you think. Have the best week.